Again, welcome to our event today. Aikido, what does trauma have to do with it? So, or vice versa, trauma, what does Aikido have to do with it? So, again, we're going to go through a lot of topics today, really interesting things. We're going to try to bring out some important points that we think really relate closely to Aikido and trauma. So I just want to introduce you to our panelists. So we'll start with Jamie Zimrin, who is the person with the beautiful flowers in her backdrop to give support to Ukraine. Excellent. So Jamie, she's a somatic psychologist and licensed marriage family therapist. She's on the board of Aikido Extensions, and she's been on the mat for 46 years. She opened the first ever women's Aikido dojo in San Francisco, helped introduce Aikido into the ex-Soviet Union, Palestine, and Ethiopia, and most recently has worked in Poland with refugees coming from Ukraine and children who are fleeing the invasion. So really excellent background and broad spectrum of movement. She's also a golf pro and has a lot of experience in bringing Aikido into other arenas. So then we're going to introduce Fran Wilson here. She first came to Aikido more than 45 years ago, and living in an Aikido household grounded her strongly in the principles of Aikido. In 2009, her life partner and her, Tom Osborne, co-founded Keganin no Senshi Aikido, which brings a modified no falls form of Aikido to vets with post-traumatic stress through connecting, training, and supporting Aikidoka who want to teach and staff veteran services programs. So this is a really interesting program bringing Aikido directly to vets. And she's continued this work since her partner's death in 2015. So great to hear from Fran. Right, next we have Ariel Herman. She's in the backdrop there with the no dogs, unfortunately, in the backdrop, but that's Ariel, that's okay. So she's a survivor of a high demand organization, the United States Aikido Federation. So we're going to find out more about the meaning of that high demand organization. And she wants to understand if it's possible to open ourselves to learning how we have caused harm and how we can do better in the Aikido community. She seeks to fundamentally change the way Aikido functions in community and in practice, using her immediate Aikido dojo in Catskill, New York, as an independent experimental pod exploring these questions. So she's really looking to go beyond a lot of the bad templates we have inherited from our larger Aikido organizational world. Okay, next, Cesar, he is there up at the top. He first stepped onto the mat at 7 years old and hasn't stepped off since. He has built massage practice that centers trauma-informed body work, and we're going to find out about what that means and explore that a little bit later. So, and he intends to build a dojo centering the same values. The question he asks in both practices and his day-to-day life is, how can I meet my partner in a way that creates a feeling of safety? So really interesting perspective. Okay, next we have Janice. Janice Title and Tatel, rhymes with cradle. Tatel has trained in Aikido since 1992 and has developed BEAT, Being Empowered After Trauma, a program based in Aikido principles. So she's actually developed a specific program relating Aikido and trauma. She's a pediatrician and has served on the boards of a child advocacy center and a battered women's shelter, and as a survivor herself, facilitated a self-help group for survivors of child abuse. She considers all of these as threads in her healing practice. So really interesting. And next we have Nilu Naini. Nilu, she's Persian. Both parents are from Iran. She started Aikido in 1994 and is the founder of the Me Too Aikido movement, which went public in April 2021. She's interested in learning how to bridge Aikido practice with social movements to create safer dojos and support systems for practitioners, instructors, and organizations. So I encourage everyone to log on to Me Too Aikido and find out more about, we'll have all these contact for information for all these great organizations at the end. We'll also be sending you a follow-up email where the ways you can directly interact with all these different groups. But Me Too Aikido is a really important movement and something we should all be supporting and encouraging. All right, great. So that is our brief rundown of our panelists. We just wanted to emphasize how much experience everyone in this group has with both Aikido and really dealing with these issues around the body, trauma, inclusiveness. I mean, a really great background, a really great panel with really strong experience to bring to this. So we're going to go right into the discussion, and we're going to start with Janice. And we wanted to sort of start from the beginning of, what is trauma? I mean, that word gets thrown around a lot. What does it really mean? And how can it relate to what we're doing every day in the dojo? So go ahead, Janice, if you want to get started.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So, I mean, trauma is a really big topic, but it's also very basic and something we've all experienced, but maybe some of us have thought about it more than others. Basically, trauma is just an event or events or series of events that cause lasting negative effects on a person's well-being. And, as a doctor, you think, oh, trauma, like a trauma room. Trauma can be physical, like you break your arm, but a big difference in the kind of trauma we're talking about today is trauma that causes lasting effects. So like physical trauma, you break your arm, it heals, you're good. But you can also have long-lasting trauma, and you can have psychological trauma from anything, from physical events or from witnessing or experiencing events that may not seem physical. There's an important thing to know is that it's not like a one-to-one match between the severity, or supposed severity of the event and the after effects. But one person might experience something that seems very severe and not really having lasting effects, and someone else might have something that may seem on the outside to be milder and haven't really changed their life in a negative way. A lot of that depends on the context more than so much what happened. If trauma happens in a context of betrayal or a toxic power dynamic or without support, it can make a big difference. It also matters what age people are, if it's repetitive, and just what tools they bring to it, and what native resilience that people come into with different tools. So you can't look at trauma. People are tempted to look at trauma and say, like, oh, they went through so much more, so I can't. Who am I to complain about this? But that's really is a question you shouldn't ask. It doesn't matter that someone else experienced more or less trauma. The person who was traumatized experienced what they experienced, and you got to go from there.
I just wanted to ask Janice, as part of this, can you define what trauma-informed means? I think that's something.
Yeah, I'm going to get there in a second.
Sure.
But basically, the trauma can lead to effects that are psychological, emotional, or physical. Emotional reactions, people can, sadness, anxiety, anger, numbness, poor self-esteem, shame, but it can also cause physical. And a lot of people try to separate the physical effects that are like in your head or not really real, the ones that are real. But I think we're going to go over this more later. But a big thing is you can't separate what's in your head. Physical trauma causes real physical changes with chronic inflammation. Studies of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences show that people who have experienced repeated trauma actually die earlier. It causes real disease. So you can't say the pain is or isn't real. There's real physical symptoms and real physical changes that come from trauma. There's also behavioral changes, which I think we've all seen. You think of angry outbursts or eating disorders, poor concentration, a lot of things that really affect your life. And those are caused by, again, real physical change in your body. Autonomic dysregulation, meaning the systems that are meant to protect you, the fight or flight systems, get out of whack, and instead of protecting you, they cause their own problems. And basically your defenses that are coming up when they're not appropriate, and it can really affect how you respond to things. It causes a lot of psychological disorders like PTSD, depression, borderline, substance abuse. But an important point here is we don't need to go there. And today we really want people to understand some of the effects, but to recognize, but not try to be a therapist, not try to be diagnosing people, because if you do, you're probably wrong, okay? Even if you're a therapist, the dojo is not a place to be doing it. So instead of trying to like diagnose trauma, there's something called a trauma-informed approach. And the trauma-informed approach was developed by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And it was really meant for, initially for health organizations, mental health organizations, but it can be applied to any organization. And trauma-informed approach is guided by 4 assumptions. They're called the 4 R's. There's realization about the trauma and how it affects people. So basically knowing that everybody has stuff. You don't have to know what their stuff is, but having a recognition that people do have stuff. Second is recognizing the signs of trauma. Sometimes you see like deer in the headlights. There's all kinds of things you might see on the map and on the mat. But instead of saying, hey, what's wrong with you? If you can just go at it by what happened to you, it can change your approach to that. You don't need to know what happened, just recognizing that there's probably stuff. The third R is having a system to respond to trauma. And we can get into that more later. And the fourth, and is really important, is resisting re-traumatization. I mean, I think the main goal of the trauma-informed approach is we don't want to re-traumatize people. We don't have to fix people, but we certainly don't want to re-traumatize them. Just one more quick thing. So the trauma-informed approach has 6 key principles. You don't have to know them, but they're all like really reasonable things. To really be trauma informed, it takes a lot of training, but you can start recognize this approach. The principles are safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues, to recognizing those. So, you know, I think you can all see that these are just good practice for anyone. And it takes a conscious, active effort and ongoing work in all areas, from individual, organizational, to be able to implement this. And it applies to everyone, students, instructors, organizations, everyone. So more later.
Yeah. And I just wanted to wrap up. I mean, you had said in your initial discussion, you know, being inclusive requires being trauma informed. I thought that was really important. You know, you can talk about being an inclusive, welcoming dojo, but if you don't know anything about trauma, you know, if you can explain that a little, Janice,
Well,
how would you?
I mean, I think dojos self-select. I mean, everybody wants more students, but you may be driving people away without even realizing you're doing that, or dismissing people as being, you know, difficult or messed up. And you realize if you can just give them space to be healthier, you actually will have a whole new pool of students. So aside from not re-traumatizing people, you actually allow people to be in the dojo and practice and benefit from Aikido.
Yeah, that's great. All right, and then so let's just move on to our next kind of question. You know, what does the body have to do with trauma? So Cesar, any way you want to approach that? How do you think about that as a professional body worker?
So I would start with the example that I give my clients, and they say, well, what's that got to do with this? Like my body, my muscles, you know, I banged my arm, but you know, why is it hard to breathe, or why is my chest hurt and this and that? I didn't hurt it. I didn't sprain anything. And so it's a very simple. So if everyone would, if you're comfortable, follow along, just in your own seats, bring your shoulders forward, bring your chin down, bring your head forward, just sort of crunch a little bit, right? This position doesn't feel good, as you were. The muscles that pull you into this position, or that hold you into this position, you know, or at least I watched on TV, I can't speak for American moms, I don't have one, but I hear that American moms say when their kids are making funny faces, stop doing that, it's going to get stuck that way. It's an exaggeration, but it's not entirely wrong. You know, the postures we hold in our lives, or in our habitual postures, our bodies adapt to hold those positions. And so when we're like this, these muscles in the front are shortened. When these muscles are shortened, specifically talking about the scalenes here, it becomes difficult to breathe fully. You can't take a full deep breath into the fullness of your air, your lung capacity. When you can't breathe deeply, it's more difficult to regulate your nervous system. It can lead to anxiety. When you're anxious, you breathe more shallowly. It becomes a cyclical, negative or positive feedback loop of this sort of anxiety-inducing posture creates anxiety, which creates more tension this way. So in just a very clear example, very direct correlation that people find really accessible is it's part of was one way that it works. Additionally, the experiences we have, we experience our lives through our bodies, right? Smells, feelings, tastes, sights, etc. So everything we experience, every moment, every difficult moment, whether it's an argument or someone harms you or, you know, any number of awful things that happen, they happen to your body. And that gets encoded into the muscle memory that we talk about on the mat. So yeah, you know, you keep doing it, this and that, muscle memory. It applies here too. I was assisting with a karate PE class on university, and the teacher was having the students go into this position on their back with their legs splayed, which for one particular student was extremely triggering. And I don't know why. I didn't hunt her down and ask her, hey, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you crying? It's not a stretch to think about what might have happened. Mm-hmm. And that posture, that position triggered that, for my assumption is that it triggered some memory, some traumatic memory. And so it's integrated.
Yeah, I really was interested in some of your thoughts around the responsibilities of Nage in an encounter, in terms of like people are giving permission for you to express yourself through their body, and what are some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah. For the viewers at home, Lisa has a list of things that we said we wanted to talk about, so she's referring to that. We bow into each other. Onegaishimasu. The way I was taught is that is a statement saying, please teach me / please train with me / please, you know, work with me. Uke is giving Nage their body to work with, to learn technique. It's an inherently vulnerable position, right? We're giving our attack. We're getting twisted into these weird positions that we're used to after doing it for X number of years. But it's still a vulnerable position. We're trusting our Nage to not hurt us, right? And in some cases, there's a technique where someone really hurts us, and then we're scared of that technique because we were harmed in that position. And so Nage's responsibility is, one, to recognize Uke's capacity to receive. But it's also important to recognize, I think the whole thing about trauma informed, the most important question, the most important statement that I say to myself as I'm engaging with clients is, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with them. I don't know what their experience is right now. I know that I'm pushing on these muscles while I'm working on them, but I don't know what they're feeling. They know, they're the expert. And I think that's really the position to come from as we're having these conversations, or as we're encountering these situations with our students. It's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'm the sensei, but I don't know this person's internal landscape. And it's also not important for us to know what that landscape is. We don't need to know the exact specifics of their background and their history. If they want to share, fine. But we can still greet them and meet them with compassion without having to know the nitty-gritty. And so back to Uke Nage, it's, you know, it's an agreement that we have with each other. If your agreement is to go really hard and you both know each other and you're really going to crank that Nikkyo because you know Uke can take it and you've trained together for 10 years, great. I find value in that training. You know, with some people I know, they know, I'm going to really try and take their head off with my yokomanuchi or my jodanski, because I've trained in other martial arts. And if I'm going to punch you, I'm going to punch you. But I don't do that with the third cue that I don't know.
Yeah, great. So let's just move on. So Jamie, again, we had sort of an open-ended question. What is this? How do these two things relate, the body and trauma, in your practice? Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, I know there's so much to say. We're all talking that we could have that be the topic. What's the body got to do with trauma? And the body obviously has a lot to do with Aikido, because it's such a physical practice, a somatic practice that we're doing physically together. So lots of interrelationship.
What does somatic mean? I mean, I'm not really clear on that. What is somatic?
Thank you for the question. Soma means the body in Greek, and people who are into somatics, I always say, it's almost like sex to us. It's like we're so excited about it, and a lot of people, somatics doesn't sound that juicy, but it really is, because it's everything having to do with the body, which houses all aspects of ourselves: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, our whole generational history, everything that's happening. The body is the one and only thing that's with us from the moment we're born to the moment we die, right? Not mom or dad or anybody. And, in all our better and worse moments, and it's registering everything that happens. So this is why going, to the somatic level, the body level, means that we can access everything about us and everything that's been and everything that's going on, because it gets processed here. So I just sort of talk type therapy or trying to solve things in our heads doesn't really work. And I think in the trauma-informed community, there's a great consensus that trauma happens somatically. I mean, we experience it in our bodies, and healing has to happen at a somatic level. It can't only be, sort of talking. So a couple of things I wanted to add were, when Janice was talking about or asked about diversity, equity, inclusion in our dojos, that all of the isms actually happen in our bodies, if you think about it. Racism, that's the color of your skin, your genderism, sexism, ableism, looksism, ageism, all of these things are about who and how we are in our bodies. So when we experience in the world and in the dojo as well, trauma or shame or disempowerment or exclusion or being put down, or somebody's getting better treatment and we're not, or we actually get hurt emotionally, physically, we get abused on the basis of those aspects of ourselves. That's a very powerful kind of traumatization, and it's our very beings, it's our very body, it's our very being. And as Jess was saying, our self-esteem, our sense of agency, our belongingness, so many things are affected by that. So again, we don't have to all be therapists. However, trauma-informed approach means that we have sensitivity, we have awareness. And I think what we're trying to do today is to really help to bring awareness, because these things are going on in our dojos. And in Aikido, it's all about relating, and we're relating physically. And then we've got this sort of, the new word for me is powerarchy, not just hierarchy, but inherent in the hierarchy is powerarchy. And we get traumatized by power and disempowerment. So, these things are all going on in the dojo. These things we need to become sensitive to in a big way. I just want to share a couple stories that popped up. One was, here I am, I'm in Jerusalem right now. And about 15 years ago or more, when we started the Middle East Aikido Peace Project and training across borders, I will never forget going to a Palestinian dojo, one of the first ones in East Jerusalem. And for Israelis, Jewish Israelis, it was a big decision to physically go there, because even driving in with a license plate, an Israeli license plate, you can be endangered. So there's like the physical response. We talk about trauma, these physical responses. And I think we're going to get more into the stress response and trauma. But anyways, that was happening. And then after class was over, I was invited by the Palestinian sensei and his family to go into the West Bank where they live, to go home with them. And so here, this man was the black belt and the teacher and kind of the, you know, in charge, right? And honestly, the patriarch, it's, you know, kind of that kind of culture. So that was all going on in the dojo. And then we changed our clothes and we're going home. And it's like we get to the checkpoint and we got to get off out of the car, get out of the taxi, walk through this checkpoint. And it was just like total humiliation. Cesar was talking this, you know, the whole body language, everything just changed, and the sense of like just having to walk through there and the feelings of humiliation. And the contrast from in the dojo to afterwards was just so profound, and the feelings of it and the feelings, I think we can all relate to that, that these feelings are intense and they're somatic. Yeah, they're in our bodies, we feel them, and then our bodies shape around them. And then we behave, we have behaviors based on those experiences. So, you know, trauma is an event and it's an experience and an ongoing experience. Sometimes it's a particular injury or bad event, negative event. Sometimes it's an ongoing experience. So that's enough for now, but to add to and some thoughts though.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, so let's go now to Nilu Sensei. Again, talking about traumas that are you come into the dojo with. So if you could talk a little bit about, you know, race and gender and, you know, people's backgrounds and how that contributes to how they experience trauma in the dojo.
I came forward publicly with my sexual assault story in April last year with my first Aikido instructor, just to try to emphasize the importance of, you know, being trauma informed, and again, not knowing necessarily what people are coming to the dojo with. For me, I came from a Persian household. So both my parents were from Iran, immigrated here. So I was first generation, and, you know, English was a second language. And so I also want to make a point of just trying to normalize the word trauma and realizing just what people are navigating. And so for me, there was a huge cultural difference in my home, the language we were speaking. There were very strong gender roles. Women generally, like for parties, were in the kitchen. Men were generally, you know, over on the side playing cards. There was very clear gender roles with what I grew up with. It's different when I went to school, when I socialized with friends, and then it was different going to the dojo. And partly of what attracted to me to Aikido was this idea of trying to figure out what equity would be like, feel like, you know, try to work through all that. So for me, there's a long line of just figuring out what gender means for me and what it means to be, you know, in an environment where there is gender equality. But it also, you know, also I feel it has impacted me is just being brown in America. And again, I was born in North America, so these topics are probably different depending on what country you're from, just because this is some international people here. I know it's different being in Iran. I've visited there several times and have taught Aikido there. So it probably varies by country. And for me, part of sharing my story is try to point to, I'm a woman, cisgender, heterosexual, that I felt very targeted. And part of that was being brown. And there are things that before and after that there might be reasons to teach Aikido that we use certain etiquette, you know, don't talk on the mat, or don't question your sensei. There might be reasons for those things, but again, taking an individual, you know, for me, taking one individual's experience and having my sensei be the person being a survivor through that experience. Yeah, we've brought it up many times. You're never going to know what a particular individual is going through, but I'm trying to also kind of normalize trauma and, you know, be able to say and share on my website, you know, that like some statistics are that females 1 in 3 females in America between age 11 and 17 have experienced some sexual assault, either directly or an attempt. And 1 in 4 males have gone through the same thing in that age range, from 11 to 17. Like being aware of those things in your dojo, because our dojos are microcosms of the world we live in. And so this topic is way too big, gender and race, to even, know sort of where to go with that. But those were reasons why I came forward publicly. I really wanted to share. I want people to know, what happened to me, so they can think about what their approach is when they go to the dojo. Because I hope it does change people. That is sort of my purpose of coming forward with what is a very personal, difficult thing I went through, and a lot of personal work I'm doing through that. But I have also started a safe space group, which has ended up being people that have experienced sexual assault or harassment in martial arts, not necessarily in Aikido, not necessarily in the dojo, but maybe you go to a retreat and you're all in camping tents, and it happens with your, karate students, but just to get us to all think in these bubbles and communities that we build, what we can do. Because for me also, when it happened, it was not just my sensei. There was a lot of dynamics with the person that facilitated it and actually made it possible. And sorry, my head just was blank when I start talking about specifics. I didn't know who to go to, because my issue was with not only my sensei, but my senpai, another person I was teaching in the dojo. So I didn't know what an organization was. I didn't know who to go to, what to do. I had my own personal things to figure out. But it brings up a lot of current health issues that I had to address,
Yeah.
issues that are coming up with the Roe v. Wade right now. So it's a lot of potentially difficult stuff to talk about and to relate to, going to a dojo where people hopefully is a real mix of people.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So Cesar, you had something to add. You just wanted to add something on this subject of race.
Racial trauma,
Mhm.
as it's relevant to Aikido and the context in the dojo. As a Mexican American man, I am generally cognizant of who's around me. I'm in Sweden at the moment. It's very white. I can hear Spanish being spoken 3 blocks away. It's an exaggeration. It's a joke, but I immediately notice who's here, who's not a Nordic Swede. So I walk into a dojo and I see, maybe a couple of other people of color. Maybe. Oftentimes none. And so I'm alone, which is not a safe place to be in a lot of this country, or a lot of this, I live in California. And so immediately I'm like, okay, how much do I have to protect, to guard, to mind myself? Because I am very literally a minority in this space. Do I need to worry about that person and this person? And are they really cranking on that Nikyo because they don't know me? They don't know I can take it. Are they cranking on my arm because they don't like Mexicans, as a large part of our population doesn't, seemingly? Am I safe here? Because I've been in situations where I'm not safe. And that trauma extends to these contexts. I don't automatically feel safe because I walked into a dojo and I put on my gi and I have a black belt on. It's like, no. I still carry those traumas with me everywhere I go. And so it's important to acknowledge that when you say, oh, everyone's welcome here, but our whole dojo is white.
Yeah.
You have to be critical of that.
Yeah.
Nilu.
Just to follow up with that, because I have been going to groups outside of Aikido to work on anti-racism work. And, you know, through that, just learning and being sort of more matter of fact that, you know, maybe interacting with the police or people in the military, which I often do in Aikido, might not be safe for me as a brown person. And I'm from Iran. You know, I do feel like I've been training with someone that like, maybe I shouldn't train this person. And so how to allow myself to train in these mixed environments and feel safe and take care of myself, and knowing that when I say no, I don't want to train, you know, working through all that versus just saying blindly, train with everybody, we're equals here. This kind of work has really helped me work through a lot of that where I sometimes have not felt safe. Dojo interactions or dojos.
Yeah, great. Well, let's just move on a little bit to Ari. She's going to kind of address maybe some of the larger issues here in terms of organizations, our lineages and our legacies from Aikido, which often include this patriarchal, all white or all, you know, all Asian and white backgrounds. So yeah, go ahead, Ari, if you want to. Yeah, how does Aikido structure impact trauma?
Wow, I feel like maybe I need to back up a little bit first. You know, I've had ideas of things that I wanted to speak of, and everyone has already spoken, has brought up like so many, you know, really interesting and also just so touching and in some ways heartbreaking points. You know, just the idea of not feeling safe on the mat, not knowing if someone wants to train with you or actually hurt you is I'm kind of absorbing that right now. You know, not that we've never talked about it before, but something about the way it's coming up is just feeling really heartbreaking right now. So feeling into that also reminded me, I've been revisiting some Resma Menakem in preparation for this panel. And I wanted to do one of the somatic practices that he offers. It's really quick. I'm going to just describe it first so that we can just do it together. So we'll be all, or anyone who wants to, and feel free to turn off your camera if you're more comfortable that way, but we'll all just stand up, we'll take a breath, and then we'll be looking over our left shoulder, but looking with your entire body, including your hips, and then taking a look up and down, and then over to the right. So I'm gonna shut up for a moment and try to adjust my camera so maybe my head's not cut off, and see if we can just do that together. All right, well, my head will be cut off, that's okay. So just start with a breath, just noticing the breath coming in and out of your body. And then looking over your left shoulder all the way behind you with your whole body. Coming back to center and looking with your head up and then down. And then following your gaze with your whole body, your hips all the way to the right, all the way behind you. Thank you. I think I needed that for myself. Hopefully it was a beneficial practice for everyone.
Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
So part of it is just grounding into your body. The stuff that we're talking about is so intense. It could be triggering some trauma reactions for some people. It could just be really difficult and in a way that brings some of us just out of our bodies. And it can really help to just come back to your body, notice what you're feeling, and you know, be able to be present. And of course, being present also means if anyone, you know, is really uncomfortable during this during this discussion and they need to step away, like, please feel free to step away. Like, this stuff is intense and it's hard, and it certainly can be triggering. So I just really want to encourage self-agency for everyone involved. So from there, I wanted to also back up to when Lisa introduced me. She mentioned that I'm a survivor of a high demand organization, the United States Aikido Federation, and that's a very loaded term, and I wanted to define it and explain briefly what I mean by high demand organization. And I'm gonna read my definition because I want to make sure it's precise and accurate. So a high demand organization is one that is based on deception regarding its primary purpose, and that manipulates its members through abusive tactics. A high demand organization is also often referred to as a cult. But one difficulty that I see in the Aikido community is that it's not always so easy to draw a hard line between cult and not cult. A lot of organizations that may not be deliberately deceptive might have cultish elements, and that can bleed into a lot of different structures and groups and organizations, including certainly a lot of Aikido organizations and dojos. And I think the only way to get away from that, we think if our intentions are good, we can avoid that. But aside from having good intentions, we need to dissect and analyze what we're doing. And I think part of doing that is participating in this panel. For me, that's a really big step in doing that. And, we can't do everything perfectly. We're human, humans make mistakes. We do it all the time, but we can keep trying to learn, and we can choose to do better once we know better.
Yeah, you just had mentioned self-agency. So can you maybe explain that a little, and how has that become a central focus of your practice?
Yeah, so that, I feel like that ties so directly into trauma. A lot of, Janice had mentioned near the beginning that an incident can lead to a trauma response, differently in different people. And somebody could have a really intense, bad experience, but not be traumatized, not carry trauma from it. A lot of that comes from, like Janice described, the circumstance, support networks, whether you are able to feel a sense of self-agency, that you are in control of your own self, your own being, your own actions, and what happens to you. Mm-hmm. And so that's huge. And that ties directly to the connection between trauma in Aikido and consent. And I feel like a trauma-informed approach, as was described in different ways, is incredibly important. But I think a core principle of being trauma-informed and supporting self-agency is that we need to develop cultures and policies of active, informed consent in our dojos. And that's one of these things that I've really been experimenting with in my own dojo, because I've never seen anything like an actual consent policy in a dojo. And we do have some traditions that support that, can lead into that. Cesar mentioned, we bow and say onegai shimasu, would you please give me the honor of training with me? So when we do that, we're asking for and we're offering consent. So that's a great jumping off point to build a more detailed culture and policy of consent. We also have some examples of, setting boundaries in our, quote unquote traditions of Aikido, such as, marking, rolling up a sleeve or marking a part of the body to say that there's an injury or a sensitivity. And so that's a way of, requesting some adaptation in the way that we train together. One thing that I feel like is really missing in our tradition, and I say tradition in quotes a lot, in air quotes, sorry, it's kind of goofy, but I feel like a lot of the tradition that a lot of the things that I was told are tradition, Japanese tradition, Aikido tradition, a lot of those things were not true. And some of those may have been deliberate lies, and some of them were just mistakes that people made as this practice came into a Western, very, white community. And, everyone has egos. Aside from abusive structures, like humans have egos and we get tangled up in our egos, and it does change things. So I think a lot of our traditions may or may not actually be Japanese traditions. But with that being said, I have not seen that I can recall a tradition that supports withdrawing consent. And I feel like giving consent is almost meaningless if in our dojos we are not fully respecting, welcoming, and honoring the option of removing consent at any time for any reason. And again, that ties in with what a number of other people had spoken of, everyone has stuff, number one. It can be something really fresh or really intense, but really every single human on the mat is carrying some kind of trauma, which could be triggered, and we don't know when and we don't know why. And for people to have self-agency, they have to be able to take care of that in themselves. Even the most brilliant teacher cannot know, as Cesar mentioned earlier, what is going on inside another person's, what did you say, inner landscape. It's not possible. So without that self-agency, we're missing so much. And that can even include like the desire to train really hard. If we have more communication, more delineation of boundaries, more discussion of consent, then it'll be really clear, who you can like go really hard with, and you can enjoy that more and be more free in it instead of wondering like, ooh, is this okay? Is it not okay? I'm not totally sure.
Okay, well, why don't we come back to this a little bit more? I think that's a great subject. What positive things can we do? Jamie, did you have something quickly? We want Francis is next, so go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback just a little bit on what Ari said, and that when we talk about sort of rank and the hierarchy in Aikido, is that there's almost a sort of sensei cultism. It's like we bow to each other, and which is a beautiful equality thing. Like in some of the peace work we've been doing, it's so awesome that people who have been like enemies are bow in mutual respect and in this safe container. That's a beautiful thing, and that allows some bridge building and friendships to form. On the other hand, we just like bow down to sensei, right? So there's sort of that aspect that I think is problematic, that can lend itself to a traumatization. So many times somebody gets really good at Aikido, and then you open a dojo because you're good in the art, you're good technically, and people don't necessarily have training as a teacher, pedagogy, how to relate, relationship. Lots of times people who've been abused become good at martial arts, and people who've been abused become abusers without necessarily knowing it. I'm not saying any of this is malicious, but it happens. The problem is that it happens without being trauma informed, trauma sensitive. Again, not needing to be a therapist, but just having the kind of sensitivities that we're talking about. And these are things that have led to power abuses and emotional pain for people, sometimes physical injury and sexual abuse. So I just kind of want to say that and just kind of get real, because this is the stuff that we're talking about that does go on in our dojos without these kinds of conversations. And I hope some progressive action, consciousness and action.
Yeah, great. Well, let's move on to Francis. So again, Francis has a really interesting program which actually uses Aikido to address trauma directly as a positive force. So if you can talk a little bit about that. I mean, how can Aikido help with trauma? Francis.
Thank you. Well, we took a different approach in that we basically took Aikido out of the dojo. And there are a number of people doing some amazing work with Aikido outside of the dojo. I noticed, I think Paul Linden is here with us, and a number of other people. I'm not going to. So what? Let me take a step back. Tom spent 8 years in the service. He was 101st Airborne and 6.5 years in Special Forces and did 3 tours in Vietnam and got out as it was getting nasty because it was getting nasty, and came out with what later we recognized as post-traumatic stress. But in 1966, nobody was talking about post-traumatic stress. When we retired, he wanted to give back to other vets and volunteered to teach an Aikido class at the VA Medical Center near us. With the goal of, he said Aikido is what saved him. And a lot focused on breathing and neutralizing negative energy, particularly for vets with combat-related post-traumatic stress. There is a lot of negative locked up energy that happens. And if you can learn to breathe and neutralize that energy, then you can make choices about how to use it. You're controlling it, it's not controlling you. It's, the analogy we use is energy is neither positive or negative. It's how you use it that determines. So if you can, through breathing and visualization, neutralize that negative energy in a battery, in your hara, then you can move from that to respond in ways that are less destructive to you and to the people around you. So as this teaching started, we discovered there were a bunch of things we needed to be aware of, and things that were triggers. A couple of the vets walked out of the first class because, Tom was in his gi and his hakama, and uniforms were a trigger. So we went to, okay, comfortable clothes you can move in. The use of language, we never used grab. It was always hold or cradle the other person's hand, because grabbing is, and we used, not that this mattered a lot to the vets, but instead of nage, which translates to throw, hurl, fall, or abandon, we use tori, which is student or partner or person who is responding to the initiation of a technique. The breathing started with warm-ups, which we never called stretches, because in the service, stretches are, no pain, no gain. And this was just to get people in touch with their bodies and get their muscles a little loosened up. And did techniques avoiding grabs, movement to the neck, or anything from behind, because those were all major triggers. Over time, we actually figured out some ways to have people do partner work initially without touching, because for some people, even touch was a trigger. And all the techniques were to a standing pin. And that was a number of reasons. Initially, the space that was available to work with at the VA was a rec room with industrial carpet over concrete. And you don't do rolls and falls on industrial carpet over concrete. But it also, many of the vets had either physical or emotional things that got in the way of doing rolls and falls. And I actually think that all dojos should periodically do techniques to a standing pin, because it forces you to really focus on the technique rather than the throw or the fall, that end result. Oh, what kind of a great throw can I do? What kind of a phenomenal roll can I do? That takes away from the sensitivity to, is the technique really working? Being very clear that it was always fine to sit out and watch, or to leave the room if that was necessary. KNSA program, we do it teaching Aikidoka this approach, and also want to be working with a facility that works with vets, so that there is a staff person. One, it's a comfortable space, and two, there is a staff person who, if they don't participate in the class, watch the class, so that they're also there to help if someone is intensely triggered. Our goal is to provide access to the techniques that help manage the symptoms as quickly as possible, which is very different from a traditional dojo, where the assumption is someone starts practicing and they absorb that over time. So what we're trying to do is get these techniques to people quickly, so that they can start using them in their everyday life. I would see Tom, he'd be driving and another driver would make him, and he'd start to, get really negative and be ready to get out of the car and start a fight. And I would see him stop and breathe and let that energy, and it made a huge difference.
I'm just wondering what specific techniques did our vets most responsive to? I mean, are you talking like Tai no Henko? Are you talking Ikkyo? Are there specific techniques?
We use the techniques as a way for people to somatically really sense when they've neutralized that negative energy, because techniques don't work if you're not balanced and centered and in touch with yourself. So I think that people who do Aikido fall into two categories. There are people who study Aikido to learn and perfect technique, and there are people who study technique to learn Aikido. And our goal was to use technique to help people learn those principles of being centered, balanced, relaxed, and working in collaboration rather than in conflict with whoever or whatever is coming at you. So, we didn't teach vets Aikido so they could learn technique. We used technique as a language to teach and enable them to learn Aiki. If anyone is really interested in the development, that initial year of development, Tom's book is available, and a big chunk of it is the blog he did through that year of classes and how these things developed, and why.
Yeah, so we'll have a link to that so everyone can access that book. I think that would be really interesting to go on. So maybe at this point, we'll make it a little more of a discussion. So again, we wanted to just sort of get people to establish a little bit of what they're interested in, what their expertise is. And then, yeah, sorry, Francis, did you want to add?
I just wanted to add one other thing.
Sure.
We believe, and other people think this also, that a big piece of what was going on for O-sensei when he developed Aikido was to find ways for him to deal with his own combat-related post-traumatic stress, having been in the Army. Okay,
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, O-sensei was in the Russo-Japanese War. And,
Japanese War, yeah.
Yeah, and I think he also served in other
foot soldier in Manchuria.
In Manchuria, yeah. So that's a really good point. You know, maybe Aikido's fundamental principle is a way to express your body physically in a nonviolent way because of post-traumatic stress. That's a really interesting, provocative thought.
So my BEAT program is different than Fran's program, but the same kind of concept where you can use the Aikido principles to be able to change your reaction to trauma. But in BEAT, I've had people in it who do Aikido, classic Aikido in the dojo, and who don't. Because when you do it in the dojo, you don't have a chance to step back and look at those things. And we've talked about triggers, and sometimes they're very clear, like Cesar was saying about the, woman in the straddle, or, Cesar also, I mean, it's so clear looking at yourself and why am I responding this way? Or, with Tom, I mean, like he has this road rage and then says where it's coming from. But I think more often than not, people are not aware. They get triggered, but they don't know they're being triggered. They think that guy needs to have his face bashed in, so in the dojo, it tends to reinforce some of those behaviors because you feel like you need to do it. So I guess we pointed out that the instructor doesn't need to know what happened, just that maybe stuff is, but really recognizing that the student may not know where that's coming from. And I think it's important to always recognize, and we learn that we may learn that through Aikido and we may not. I mean, not everyone is evolved, or really, people who haven't really thought about this stuff are just going to keep continuing to react in a way that may not be the healthiest for anybody.
I just wanted to point out, we were just having a discussion this morning in the dojo with a person who's a junior high school teacher, and in schools now, social emotional learning, if you're lucky enough to live in a state that has that, incorporates breathing, physical movement to allow kids to process stress and anger and emotions. So this is something that's really rising in the culture, I think, and something that Aikido has a real head start on, that we can really contribute to the conversation.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a great segue. We had all wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about the nervous system in terms of stress and trauma, and that, under stress, we have the usual fight, flight, freeze. I actually call them 5 F's: fight, flight, freeze, fawning. Fawning means pleasing, displeasing kind of behavior and giving up your power. And my 5th one is fuck. Okay, when you're just in like response. So those all happen. And the thing is, when we're a trauma response is very much a stress response. And so we move into our sympathetic nervous system, which is designed to deal with a tiger, a lion, a bear, trauma, emergencies, something bad happens, right? And so that we get this extra energy, we get this extra alertness, and our brain function goes back down to our limbic brain from up here, and we got all this adrenaline, we're charged, we're supercharged, but we're not supposed to stay in that state. And what happens is in trauma response, fear, freeze, flight, all these things, we can get stuck. And so that all that keeps going on. And then we lose our higher reasoning, we lose our calm, we lose our emotional intelligence, all of these things. So the ability to shift, when we're talking about making a somatic shift, is into the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's why all of these practices are common. And they're at the heart of Aikido: centering, balance, grounding, breathing, integrating, uniting. All of that stuff that we do makes Aikido and any somatic practice really just ideal for, and actually part of accepted practice in trauma therapy and, somatic psychotherapeutic trauma therapy. So, if we become aware of that's what we're doing in Aikido, and that actually in Aikido, we are we're putting people under stress. We're coming to hurt you. We're coming to hit you. We're coming to attack you. I hate you. I'm threatening you. It's like, that's what is trauma and people living in trauma. What do we do in the face of that? So it's really interesting when, you get that awareness of Aikido training and what we're doing in the dojo as working with the stress response, the trauma response, and really training ourselves and each other to move into parasympathetic empowerment and agency. I just want to give you 3 more F's. My new book is coming out, but so you move from those 5 F's to 3 F's of having focus, presence and focus, and freedom and flow. So we unfreeze, we move into freedom, and we move into flow with focus. And those are the basics of empowerment. And that's what we're working on in Aikido.
Yeah, so we had a question from 2 different participants, which was cool. What do we do if someone is triggered in the dojo? What specific things can we do if someone has a strong reaction to something we're doing on the mat, like a showman attack or a grab or, a posture on the ground? So anyone have any specific tools?
We have 2 hands raised here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
So I think a big part of that, of course, those are amazing questions, and that's hugely important. What to do if someone's triggered and really struggling. I think in order to address it, you need to have in the dojo, you need to have already created a container for that, which includes what I mentioned before, that any removal of consent and stepping off the mat, moving away from a partner, is welcomed and honored and respected. So I think that's number 1. A lot of times we feel like we can't or shouldn't stop. And this has even happened in my dojo. And I talk about this stuff all the time about self-agency and consent. And I've had students who something was getting triggered, but they felt like they should stay on the mat. And they stayed longer than was actually healthy for them because they just felt like that's what they should do. So it's really important to develop a culture where that self-agency is grown, I guess. And then, there's other ways of creating, a kind of, container where people can just be. And I think it's really important to address in answering this scope of practice. We don't want to try to be therapists if we're not trained. Even if we are trained therapists, the dojo is not the appropriate place for that, unless everyone there has already consented to some kind of therapeutic process. So holding space, learning just how to hold space and making sure that you're clear on your own scope of practice and you're not trying to give something that you're not qualified to give.
Go ahead, Cesar. Yep.
The first point that Ari made was what I was going to say, is that you need to have already a baked in culture of this. I tell every single massage client that I have the first time they meet me, look, I'm really inviting each of you, every single client who's here, who sees me, to voice anything, any discomfort, you don't like the music, you're too warm, you're too cold, you don't like something in the way that I'm working with you, you're uncomfortable in some way, anything, please let me know. And, we can figure out how to adjust it to your needs. And it's on me as the person in power to make sure that communication is happening. Because, I'm sure we've all experienced this, we voice some complaint or some need and someone responds with, well, you didn't tell me that before, it's your fault.
Yeah.
So I immediately
I saw a follow-up question is, what do you do about the person who is triggering? What do you do about someone who may be too violent, who may hurt people, who may cross boundaries? And I just, from my experience, I have a friend who was severely traumatized in the dojo, not because of what happened, but because the person who injured her on purpose was not made to pay, did not have any consequences. And I would say to instructors out there, make sure you have strong consequences. Kick people the fuck out. Yeah, they may have issues around why they're hurting people or triggering people. That's not your job to address them. Kick them the fuck out. That's my own perspective.
Can you
Go
mute
ahead.
whoever that is?
Yeah, please mute. Go ahead, Francis.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that, you know, if you are, if it's your dojo or you're high ranked in a dojo, it's much easier to do that. If you are just, you know, coming in, you have maybe haven't been practicing all that long, it's a lot more challenging, and the structures are such, like a lot of things outside of Aikido in our society, that to be taken seriously and validated is not as much the norm as it would be nice if it were, or it should be. And that if that's going on, that's your situation, and you can get support from other people in the dojo, that may help to, I think changing those cultures is not easy.
Yeah,
I mean, changing the culture of any organization isn't easy. And it's harder when the people who are in power are resistant.
well, we
to
just
those
have a
changes.
question from someone anonymous. How do you advocate for yourself with a sensei? If you feel like it's not a safe space, how do you advocate for yourself? And I don't know if anyone has answers for that. Neelu, do you have any thoughts on that? How do you, if you feel like it's not a safe space or someone is not respecting your boundaries, how do you advocate for yourself?
I mean, there's sometimes a lot of processing that needs to be done in any particular situation. So it's difficult. So I'm navigating who is someone I can brainstorm things out, what's possible, what's not possible, depending on the cultural environment you've created and the individuals. And it is a lot sometimes, you know, sometimes people stop training because they don't have good ways, means, protocols in the dojo for them to advocate for themselves. So
I think every dojo should have like a what we have in our organization, a student representative or a student.
something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
our space groups are, you know, a place where people can come now. But again, it's not run by an organization. I'm doing it on my own time. Things like that is what I think would be helpful when you have more resources from an organization to provide those opportunities. And then where again, the power dynamics is huge. Sometimes people don't have a place to go and they quit.
Yeah, ombudsman.
I think,
as much as I hate
yeah,
that.
the ombudsman's a great idea. What you were saying is, you know, representative, someone, I think what we, you know, Aikido Solstice seminars has been amongst some leaders, but not the only ones, that we're all looking at how can we create a shift dojo cultures and the culture in our Aikido organizations. And, you know, we're starting to bring to light these issues and talk about them. And then to look at, well, how do we make, you know, some expand upon the rules and the ethics that people agree to when they sign up to train in Aikido. This is how we operate here. And for every dojo to look at that, to be sharing what they're doing and the language that they're using, some of the procedures like having an ombudsperson or somebody like that, that these things are new. You know, before it's like, you just shut up and train. And you, I mean, if you even ask your sensei, like, if you can test, like, that's a big sin. You know, there are things that are like real sins in Aikido that are based on power that really hurt people and that have discouraged free kind of conversation and being able to speak up, much less find support if you feel like something's unfair or even traumatic to you as a student.
Yeah, and I just want to say all of us are available if you do need someone to talk to about any of these issues. You will be giving out our contacts, and especially Me Too Aikido is a forum where you can go anonymously and discuss things. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Cesar.
Janice has had her hand up for a minute first.
Oh, sorry. Janice?
I just, a lot of talk about, speaking up and creating all these structures so that people can speak up and advocates, but none of it will work unless you actually act on it. Okay, you can say a lot of the right things, but unless it actually happens in real life, it's not going to do anything. And I think, a really good experience at my last summer camp. The Shihan called me up for ukemi, and I just had a really bad groin pull. I was trying to hang back, and he called me up, and I'm like, no. So he's like, yeah, come. So, okay, fine. Who's going to say no to the Shihan? And I said, no, I can't fall down. And so he very gently tried to throw me, but I would not fall down. I said, because I couldn't do that without hurting myself. So he's trying to go gentler, and he kind of whispers in my ear, Janice, please fall down. And eventually, I was in a place where I felt safe, and I did it. And that was so not the way things are done. So I thought it was probably a really good example. They're up there, it's like, I said no, and I did not fall down for the Shihan, and he actually practiced real Aikido. He was very sensitive to where I was. He wasn't forcing anything, but he also wasn't fully backing off on it. He wasn't, he was going to let me back off, but he didn't force me through anything. He didn't say, fine, go get someone else. We really worked together. And I thought that was a really, really great, demonstration for everyone around there. But, so you have to have it really from the top, showing that, it's consent, you only got shimas, but you got to be able to say no, and not just say you can, but have it actually happen sometimes. So it really is a cultural thing, and we got to change the culture, not just the rules around it, because we see it happening that people will do those beautiful structures and policies instead of doing what is needed.
We really want to make this just the beginning. We want to really bring up some topics related to this. There's so much here, and I think people just want to make Aikido better. So that's what we want. We love Aikido. We want to make it better. We want to make it. We want to bring it to more people, and this is a way to do that. So, and please do also help us keep bringing these to you through Zoom and other platforms if you can help donate. And we will also hopefully have another discussion soon, and maybe even an event where we can practice some of these great somatic exercises, work physically with these concepts, as we love to do as Aikidoka. We'd like to make it happen in the physical plane. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone from around the world. Wow, that was so cool.